She got caught boasting to our mutual friends about how she tricked me, so I made sure she ended up friendless. I filed for divorce and took everything I could. I've always hated seeing bad things happen to decent people, but it seems like that's the way the world works. If you go out of your way to avoid hurting others, some folks take it as an open invitation to walk all over you. And they'll keep doing it if you don't stand up for yourself. This time, I wasn't letting her get away with it. Let me make one thing clear. I'm not some overly nice guy bitter about being wronged. I'm absolutely furious because someone I cared about deeply had been playing me for a fool for years. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and my wife, Sarah, who's 28, and I had been married for 3 years. All the time, I thought our relationship was rock solid. Sure, we had a few rough patches, but I figured we'd work through them, and everything was smooth sailing. Our friends would even tell us they envied our relationship, and I believed it too. I thought I'd hit the jackpot and found my soulmate. We met at a party hosted by a mutual friend, Jack. He and I worked together, and she knew him from college. Jack wasn't trying to play matchmaker or anything. We just bumped into each other at the party, started talking, and things took off from there. Sarah seemed like everything I could ever want in a partner. We had similar interests, so I didn't hesitate to ask her out. She said yes, and after a second date, the rest was history. 2 years later, we got married. We didn't have kids yet, though we were starting to talk about it. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher, and she absolutely adored kids, but the timing never felt right for us. Her job didn't pay much, but I made enough as a senior software developer to cover all our needs. I job hopped quite a bit, which didn't give us the stability I felt we needed to start a family. One thing you should know is that Sarah and her sister, Emily, had a rocky relationship. They didn't get along at all. Whether it was jealousy, sibling rivalry, or just clashing personalities, they fought constantly. They'd occasionally have these short-lived periods of peace, sometimes lasting a few days, sometimes a month, but they always found something new to argue about. I tried my best to stay out of their drama. It never seemed wise to get caught in the crossfire. I figured they'd always find a way to sort it out. But I never could have imagined that one of their fights would drag me into a mess that would completely shatter my life. It all started with one of their usual arguments. Over what? I couldn't tell you. This time, though, it seemed worse than usual. Emily was clearly the offended party, and she was really upset. Sarah wouldn't give me any details about what happened, which was strange since she normally unloaded every bit of their drama onto me. This silence made me suspect that Sarah was genuinely at fault. Still, I didn't let it concern me too much. I figured they'd patch things up, just like always. Then, out of the blue, Emily called me one day. It was unusual since we didn't really talk much. Before I could even say hello, she dropped a bombshell. Remember that pregnancy scare you guys had while you were dating? She made it up. What a way to start a conversation. At first, I thought I must have misheard her, so I asked her to repeat it. She said the exact same thing. I sat there, stunned, trying to process her words. My initial thought was that it had to be a bad joke. Then I started thinking maybe it was a spiteful lie to get back at Sarah. In my firmest tone, I told her, "That's not funny, Emily." But she didn't flinch. She calmly insisted it was the truth. She pointed out that Sarah had mentioned the pregnancy scare to her at the time, which wasn't surprising since they were close. But Emily claimed Sarah had admitted to faking the whole thing, all to keep me from leaving. Supposedly, Sarah was afraid of losing the comfortable life I provided. Suddenly, pieces started to fall into place. That pregnancy scare had brought us closer while we dealt with it. But this new perspective made it seem far more manipulative than I could have ever imagined. I told Emily that the test had been positive, though, to which she quickly replied, "She faked that too." You can buy fake pregnancy tests online for a few bucks that always show positive. I didn't believe her at first. The idea of Sarah doing something so calculated seemed absurd. But a quick Google search later proved that such tests existed. Back when it happened, our relationship had been in a rough spot. Breaking up was a real possibility, but the scare pushed us to work on our issues. When we eventually found out she wasn't pregnant, we chalked it up to a faulty test. I'd always seen that experience as something that had strengthened our bond. Now, it looked like a carefully planned manipulation. Emily must have sensed my hesitation because she offered to send me proof. Then she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, a knot tightening in my chest as I waited for her text. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it either. If Sarah had lied about this, what else might she have been hiding? I sat there, dreading every second as I waited for the message from Emily. I needed to know if I'd been deceived, but I was terrified of what I might uncover. If she had lied to me about something this big, I didn't see how we could ever recover as a couple. What else could she have hidden from me? It took Emily about 3 minutes to send over the evidence, but it felt like an eternity. When I opened the messages, my stomach sank. The texts between Sarah and her sister stretched back years, all the way to when we were dating. They laid everything out in shocking detail. Sarah had been scared I might leave her, so she came up with a plan to fix everything. She faked the pregnancy test and bragged to Emily about how well it worked. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My first instinct was to confront Sarah immediately, but I knew she'd deny it. I needed solid proof before I called her out. I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life, but I forced myself to stay calm and think logically. If she lied about this, what else had she been hiding? I had to know. And as it turned out, there was a lot more. For the next week, I played the role of the clueless, oblivious husband. It wasn't easy. I was distant, there was no intimacy between us, and I wasn't as warm as I used to be. Sarah noticed something was wrong and kept asking me about it, but I blamed work stress. In the meantime, I was taking every chance I got to go through her messages, everything from social media to emails to texts. If her laptop was left open or her phone was lying around while she showered, I was on it. I was thorough. If she had been lying from the beginning, I needed to comb through years of her conversations. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her messages with two of her closest friends, Ashley and Jessica, revealed everything. I didn't even have to scroll back more than a few months. Sarah had been having an affair. About a year ago, she'd told her friends she was tired of our relationship, but couldn't let go of the financial security I provided. She mentioned a guy named Tyler, who made her feel alive and excited. He was the father of one of her students from the previous year. Sarah wanted to leave me for him, but admitted she couldn't because he didn't make nearly as much money as I did. Reading that made me feel physically sick, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed the full story. A few months later, I found messages where she laughed with her friends about how easily she had tricked me. She'd been seeing Tyler for months, and they joked about how clueless I was, calling me her safety net. At some point, I couldn't read anymore. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. The Sarah I saw in those messages was cold and calculating. Someone who had been playing me from the very beginning. She treated my pain like it was some kind of game. Oddly enough, I realized I was more furious than heartbroken. I wasn't going to let this slide. I marched straight to where she was sitting, tossed her phone into her lap, and demanded to know everything about Tyler. She didn't even try to deny it. The evidence was right there in front of her. At first, she didn't say anything, but when I shouted at her to explain herself, she started crying. Through her tears, she said she never meant to hurt me. She claimed our relationship had started to feel too safe and boring, and she just wanted a little excitement. According to her, Tyler didn't mean anything, and she'd always planned to break things off with him eventually. Hearing that set me off. I'll admit it. I spent 10 solid minutes yelling at her. I called her out for how stupid and selfish her choices were, and told her she completely destroyed our relationship. I brought up what Emily had told me about the fake pregnancy, and pointed out how she'd been lying and manipulating me for years. Sarah just cried harder and begged me to give us another chance, saying we could still fix things. I told her it was over. She needed to pack her things and leave. It took another hour of shouting before she finally gathered her belongings and left the house. Before walking out the door, she said she'd come back in the morning so we could both calm down and talk things through. But I wasn't going to wait around. As soon as she left, I started looking up divorce lawyers. If she thought she could weasel her way out of this and keep me as her safety net, she had another thing coming. Sure enough, Sarah showed up the next morning. I was heading out to meet with a lawyer when she caught me in the driveway. She was crying and begging for a chance to talk, but I didn't stop walking. I told her there was nothing to discuss unless my lawyer was present. That shut her up. Before driving off, I made it clear I was filing for divorce. The tears started again, but I didn't let them bother me. I knew she wasn't really sorry. She was just upset that she'd been caught and was losing her lifeline. I knew she didn't actually feel guilty. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was just upset that she got caught and was about to lose her safety net. I got into my car and drove off, ignoring the dozen or so calls she made to my phone on the way to the lawyer's office. I didn't see any point in answering. There was nothing she could say that would change what was coming. When the divorce papers were ready, she was served. Her reaction wasn't sadness this time. It was anger. She started blaming me for the failure of our relationship, claiming that people cheat all the time and that couples are supposed to work through it with communication. Apparently, it was my unwillingness to compromise that made me the problem. That excuse only made me angrier. It was a new level of dodging accountability. We had another argument, one that ended with me storming off. But after that, I realized something. I wasn't going to feel satisfied with just ending our marriage. She was trying to play the victim and twist the story to make me the bad guy. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wanted her to face the consequences of everything she'd done. I remembered the way she and her friends had laughed about me in their group chat, and I knew exactly how to strike back. It was only a matter of time before she started spinning more lies to her friends, so I decided to make sure she didn't have any friends left to manipulate. Over the years, Sarah had talked a lot of trash about her friends behind their backs. Most of it had been verbal, but a fair amount was in writing. I went through her messages and gathered every nasty comment she'd ever made about them. I didn't hold back. I texted each of her friends with the receipts. Every insult, every snide remark, every dirty little detail she'd shared about them. Where possible, I included screenshots. For good measure, I threw in proof of her infidelity as well. The responses came flooding and almost immediately. Disbelief, anger, shock. None of them were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. Why would they? She'd said awful things about them behind their backs. It didn't even take half an hour before Sarah confronted me. She was livid. Her friends were furious and had all turned on her. Some swore they'd never speak to her again, while others said they were glad she was getting a divorce. Sarah accused me of being petty, vindictive, and cruel. But I didn't care. This wasn't just about revenge for the sake of it, though I'll admit that was part of it. I wanted to expose her for what she truly was. If she was going to lie, cheat, and use people, then she didn't deserve to keep pretending to cherish the friendship she had. I told her she could save her outrage for someone gullible enough to buy her lies. As expected, Sarah tried to salvage her image, just like I'd predicted. She went to her friends and painted me as a bitter ex-husband out to destroy her reputation. But none of them believed her. They'd seen the proof with their own eyes, and many of them had experienced her backstabbing firsthand. She couldn't win any of them over. The divorce itself was brutal. We fought tooth and nail over everything, but in the end, most of it went my way. I had clear evidence of her infidelity, which made a big difference in my state. We didn't have kids, and she had her own job, so I managed to avoid paying alimony. Her job didn't pay much, but the judge decided it was sufficient for her to get by without my income. After the dust settled, she didn't have much of a support system left. Her parents were the only ones still speaking to her, but even they were disappointed in her, according to Emily. They couldn't abandon her entirely, but it was clear they didn't approve of her actions. Emily, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with her anymore. After I showed Emily some of the things Sarah had said about her behind her back, their relationship was completely destroyed. It became obvious how bad things had gotten for Sarah about 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. That's when she showed up at my door. She'd been calling me non-stop since the paperwork was signed, but I never answered. I had nothing to say to her. After everything she'd done, lying to me, using me for money, and cheating on me, there was no part of me that wanted to hear her out. Still, I let her in, mostly out of curiosity about what she had to say. It was clear she had hit rock bottom. She had no friends left, and her safety net had been completely ripped away. She started with an apology, but it felt hollow, like she wasn't sorry for what she did, just sorry for the consequences. I could tell she was more upset about her situation than anything else. Listening to her whine about how hard her life had become was exhausting. I already regretted letting her in. Once the apology was out of the way, she started pleading with me to take her back. She said she'd finally realized how badly she'd screwed up, and claimed she was ready to change. She insisted that the money didn't matter anymore, and that all she wanted was to fix things between us. I didn't believe her for a second, but I decided to ask about Tyler. That question made her pause. After a long moment of silence, she admitted that things were over with him, and swore she was fully committed to winning me back, so we could have a fresh start. I told her she was welcome to her fresh start, but I wouldn't be part of it. She could rebuild her life with Tyler or whoever else she wanted, but I was done. When the tears started flowing again, I just felt irritated. I'd seen this act too many times before. Crying was her go-to move when she ran out of other ways to manipulate me. I wasn't going to fall for it again. I stood up and calmly guided her to the door. I told her to move on with her life, whether it was with Tyler or whatever unfortunate guy she managed to rope in next. She made one last desperate attempt, telling me I was the only person she had ever truly loved. I didn't respond to that. I just closed the door behind her and locked it. That was the last time I saw her. I've stayed committed to going no contact with her since then. I don't even speak to her family anymore. I feel no pity for her, and no regret about how I handled things. After years of being taken advantage of, I finally reclaimed my self-worth. I protected what I owned, secured my finances, and, most importantly, exposed her for who she really was. I didn't let her twist the story to paint herself as the victim. Since all that happened, I've made a point of focusing on myself for a change. I spent so many years giving to her selflessly that I completely forgot to invest in my own happiness and growth. Now, I've been pouring my energy into my career and personal development. I even reconnected with an old hobby, drone piloting, and it's brought me a surprising amount of joy. Looking back, the entire experience was awful. There's no sugarcoating that. But I'm thankful that I saw the truth when I did. Better late than never, I guess. People like her often play the victim instead of taking responsibility for their actions. They deflect, gaslight, and try to make you feel guilty for their mistakes. That whole "people cheat every day" excuse? Completely outrageous. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate anything. All I did was hold up a mirror to her behavior and let the truth speak for itself. If her friends couldn't stick by her after seeing the person she really was, that's on her, not me. She dug her own grave. So let me ask you this. What would you do if you found out your partner had manipulated you from the start, like Sarah did with her fake pregnancy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining me today on Our Space. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next story. Until next time. After Sarah walked out of my life for good, I thought I'd feel relief. And I did, for a while. But the quietness of an empty house has a way of sneaking up on you. The silence was deafening, forcing me to sit with the memories of what had happened. Even though I knew I had done the right thing, there was this lingering bitterness, a gnawing feeling that I had wasted years of my life on someone who never truly cared for me. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, and working late into the night. My job as a senior developer had always been demanding, but now it became an escape. The more I immersed myself in code, the less I had to think about the past. I even started looking into freelance gigs, hoping to fill the empty hours with something productive. But no matter how busy I kept myself, there were still moments when the memories crept in. Her laughter, her lies, and the betrayal that followed. One evening, I decided to dig out my old drone equipment. It had been years since I'd flown one, but the hobby had once brought me so much peace. After dusting off the gear and charging the batteries, I drove out to an open field at the edge of town. As the drone soared into the sky, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in months. Watching the world from above, everything seemed so small, so insignificant. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. Over the next few weeks, flying drones became my therapy. I started posting videos online, capturing stunning aerial shots of forests, lakes, and cityscapes. To my surprise, the videos gained traction. Comments poured in, with people admiring the views and asking for tips on flying drones. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was building something positive. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about creating. Then, one day, I got an unexpected message. It was from Emily, Sarah's sister. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, but her name popping up in my inbox brought back a flood of memories. I hesitated before opening the message, unsure of what she could possibly want. When I finally read it, I was taken aback. She apologized for everything that had happened and thanked me for showing her the truth about Sarah. Apparently, their family had been struggling with Sarah's behavior for years, but no one had ever called her out the way I did. Emily and I exchanged a few more messages, and to my surprise, the conversations were refreshing. She was honest and direct, a stark contrast to her sister. Over time, we started talking regularly. She shared stories about her own struggles, including her attempts to distance herself from the toxic family dynamics that had overshadowed her life. In a strange way, we bonded over the shared experience of dealing with Sarah's manipulation. But life wasn't all smooth sailing. Sarah wasn't done with her games. One day, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Sarah. Her voice was calm, almost calculated, as she started talking about rebuilding bridges and letting go of the past. She claimed she'd been going to therapy and that she was a changed person. "I'm not interested, Sarah," I said, cutting her off. "We've been over this. There's nothing left to talk about. I know I messed up, she replied, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. But I've been working on myself, and I really think we could start over. Just one coffee. That's all I'm asking. I hung up without saying another word. I wasn't going to fall for her act again. But her call left me uneasy. What was her angle this time? Was she trying to worm her way back into my life? Or was she just desperate for someone to listen to her sob story? The next week, Emily called me with some news. Apparently, Sarah had been reaching out to everyone. Friends, family, even old co-workers, spinning tales about how I had abandoned her when she was at her lowest. Emily told me not to worry, assuring me that no one was buying Sarah's version of events. Still, it bothered me that she was trying to rewrite the narrative. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Sarah control the story anymore. I started writing about my experiences, detailing everything from the fake pregnancy to the affair and the divorce. I posted it anonymously on a few forums, not to seek revenge but to share my story with others who might be going through something similar. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of betrayal and thanked me for being honest. It felt cathartic to finally put everything out there. One day, I received a private message from a woman named Claire. She'd read my post and said it resonated deeply with her. Claire had been in a toxic relationship for years and was struggling to find the strength to leave. We started talking, and our conversations quickly became a source of comfort for both of us. Claire was kind, funny, and incredibly insightful. She'd been through her own battles and come out stronger for it. As weeks turned into months, Claire and I grew closer. We started meeting in person, and it didn't take long before we realized there was something special between us. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Claire wasn't just someone to fill the void, she was someone who understood me on a level I hadn't thought possible. Through my relationship with Claire, I learned to let go of the bitterness I'd been holding onto. Sarah's actions had left scars, but they didn't define me. I was more than the man who'd been betrayed. I was someone capable of building a new life, a better life. Looking back, the experience with Sarah taught me more than I ever wanted to know about deceit and manipulation. But it also taught me about resilience. I learned to stand up for myself, to value my own worth, and to surround myself with people who genuinely cared about me. It was a painful journey, but one that ultimately led me to a place of peace. Now, when I'm out flying my drones or spending time with Claire, I think about how far I've come. Life has a way of knocking you down when you least expect it, but it also gives you the tools to get back up. I'll never forget what happened with Sarah, but I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me. Because in the end, I didn't just survive, I thrived. Months turned into a year, and I started finding a rhythm again. My relationship with Claire flourished, but it wasn't without its own challenges. We both had our share of baggage to unpack. One night, as we sat on my couch sharing a bottle of wine, she opened up about her ex, a man who had emotionally and financially drained her for years. Listening to her story reminded me of my own ordeal, and I realized how deeply those experiences shape us. We promised each other that we'd always communicate openly, no matter how hard it might be. Meanwhile, my drone videos continued to gain popularity. I'd started a small YouTube channel, and before I knew it, I was being approached by companies interested in sponsorships. It felt surreal to turn something that had once been a mere hobby into a side career. The extra income was nice, but more than that, it gave me a sense of purpose. One day, I received an invitation to participate in a drone piloting competition. It was being held in a nearby city, and the thought of entering both excited and terrified me. Claire encouraged me to go for it, reminding me how far I'd come. With her support, I decided to take the leap. The competition was intense, filled with skilled pilots from all over the country. I didn't win, but I placed in the top 10, which felt like a victory in itself. After the event, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed. A year ago, I was trapped in a toxic marriage, drowning in lies and manipulation. Now, I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, and creating a future that felt truly mine. It wasn't just about escaping the past anymore. It was about embracing the possibilities of the present. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One afternoon, as I was preparing to head out for a drone shoot, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. This time, it wasn't Sarah. It was one of her former friends, someone I hadn't heard from since the fallout. She sounded nervous, but insisted on meeting me in person. Curious, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop, and she wasted no time getting to the point. Apparently, Sarah had been telling people that I had ruined her life. But what caught my attention was her friend's next admission. Sarah had been reaching out to Tyler again, trying to rekindle whatever they'd had. According to her friend, Tyler had rebuffed Sarah's advances, and was now threatening to expose her for some of the lies she told during their affair. Hearing this, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. On one hand, it confirmed that Sarah hadn't changed. On the other hand, it meant she was finally facing consequences for her actions. I decided not to get involved. Sarah's drama was no longer my responsibility. Instead, I focused on my future. Claire and I started planning trips together, combining my love for drones with her passion for photography. We explored national parks, captured breathtaking landscapes, and even talked about starting a joint project. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something meaningful with someone who truly valued me. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize how much I've grown. The pain and betrayal I endured weren't the end of my story. They were just a chapter. Life moves forward, and so have I. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful. After finally settling into a peaceful rhythm with Claire, I thought the turbulence in my life was behind me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could focus on the present without the shadows of the past haunting me. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It began with an unexpected email one evening. I was editing a drone video for a client when the notification popped up. The subject line read, "We need to talk." My stomach sank as I opened it and saw Sarah's name in the sender's field. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the message. It was long, rambling, and full of the same mix of apologies and excuses I'd heard before. She claimed she wanted closure and, more importantly, to warn me about something. "There are things you don't know about, and I think you deserve the truth," she wrote. I almost deleted it without responding, but a part of me was curious. Closure had been a one-sided journey for me, and I wondered if this was her way of finally taking responsibility. I decided to let it sit in my inbox for a day while I mulled over whether to reply. When I told Claire about the email, she looked concerned but didn't try to sway me one way or another. "Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons," she said. Her support, as always, was steady and unwavering. It gave me the clarity I needed to make my decision. The next day, I responded to Sarah's email with a short message. "What do you want to say?" Her reply came within minutes, asking to meet in person. I hesitated but eventually agreed, on the condition that it would be in a public place. We arranged to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town later that week. The day of the meeting, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and resolve. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted Sarah sitting at a corner table, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. She had always been meticulous about her appearance, but now her hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, almost. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, lacking the confidence she used to exude. "What is it you need to tell me?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, fiddling with the edge of her coffee cup. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for," she began. "And I know I have no right to ask for your time. But there's something you need to know about Tyler." Hearing his name immediately put me on edge. "What about him?" Sarah leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's been contacting me again. And not just me, he's been reaching out to people from your life too." At first, I didn't believe her. Why would Tyler, someone I'd never met and had no connection to, want to involve himself in my life? But as she spoke, detailing how he had been prying into my personal and professional circles, I started to wonder if there was more to this than I realized. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to gauge her sincerity. She sighed. "Because I'm tired of living in the mess I've created. Tyler isn't who I thought he was, and I think he's trying to hurt you as some sort of twisted revenge." I left the meeting feeling more conflicted than ever. Was this another manipulation, or was Sarah genuinely trying to make amends? Either way, I couldn't ignore the possibility that Tyler's involvement could escalate into something serious. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. My YouTube channel, which had been steadily growing, suddenly faced a wave of negative comments and downvotes. Some of the messages were oddly personal, mentioning details about my past that only someone close to Sarah or Tyler could know. Then, one of my clients emailed me, saying they'd received an anonymous message warning them not to work with me. It became clear that Tyler was behind it. I felt anger bubbling up again, the same kind of fury I'd felt during the worst days of my marriage. But this time, I had no intention of letting someone else's toxicity derail my life. I reached out to a lawyer and explained the situation. Together, we drafted a cease and desist letter to send to Tyler, warning him to stop his behavior or face legal action. At the same time, I tightened the security on my online accounts and started documenting every instance of harassment. Through it all, Claire was my rock. She reminded me to focus on what mattered, our life together and the future we were building. "People like Tyler feed off your attention," she said one night as we sat on the couch. "Don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he's getting to you." Her words stayed with me. I channeled my energy into my drone work, diving into a new project that involved collaborating with a local wildlife conservation group. The project was a welcome distraction and gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a while. Flying over protected forests and capturing footage of endangered species reminded me of the beauty in the world, beauty worth fighting for. As the weeks turned into months, the harassment began to die down. Whether it was the cease and desist letter, or simply Tyler losing interest, I didn't know. But I didn't care. What mattered was that I was finally free to move forward without the constant shadow of my past looming over me. Claire and I decided to take a trip to the Pacific Northwest, combining our love for photography and drone piloting. The trip was everything we'd hoped for and more. We hiked through lush green forests, stood in awe of towering waterfalls, and spent hours capturing the breathtaking scenery from above. It felt like a reset, a chance to fully embrace the life we were building together. On the last night of our trip, as we watched the sunset over a rocky coastline, Claire turned to me with a smile. "You've come a long way," she said. "I'm proud of you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd defined myself by the pain and betrayal I'd endured. But now, I realized that those experiences were just a part of my story, not the whole thing. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and found someone who truly valued me for who I was. As we stood there, hand in hand, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to face them.